Thank you. It's so good to be here because this is my favorite topic, and it's hard to decide, what to tell you about because I could talk about them all day. And so I really appreciate your interest in prairie chickens and um, your care about them. And I think if you don't know much about them right now, by the end of this talk, that you'll be um, you'll want to come and see them. And actually, we have an opportunity to come and see them. So I'm going to focus this talk on what makes males sexy. This is something I started during my PhD work that I continued when I was a professor at a regional campus of Ohio State. And I don't do research anymore as the executive director of Audubon of Kansas, but I think that the stories and the lessons learned are translating and making people care more about prairie chickens. So let's start out with the basics. So this prairie chicken, is it male or female? Well, you look at it and you're like, well, it has a bright orange patch in its throat. So if you guessed male, you're correct. Males also have these pinnae. These are feathers behind the head. They can raise them and lower them. The pinnae are very long and black. They have a large fleshy comb above the eye, similar to many other grouse species. And of course, that air sac. This is a greater prairie chicken, so it has a very large orange air sac. And its tail is completely black. So that is how we identify a male prairie chicken. This here is a female, and you can see, looks like the grass that they're in. They do have pinnae, and I have seen them raise those pinnae up on occasion. They do that when they're fighting with other females. And part of their skin is actually a little bit reddish in color right there. But you can say the pinnae are small and they have big white patches on them as well. The tail is barred, and so, not completely black. So, and of course, no comb above the eye. So this is a female prairie chicken blending in with the prairie grass. There are two species of prairie chicken, and that's what makes Kansas unique, is that the only place where the two ranges overlap currently is in Western Kansas. And so I know this is kind of a busy picture, so let's just go through what each of the colors mean. So greater prairie chicken used to inhabit all of the light gray area. So they used to go from the prairie provinces of Canada all the way south to Texas, east to Ohio, and west to Wyoming. So that was the historical range. Then you see a little bit darker and darker still. So the darkest blue color is where they are currently. And it's the best populations for greater prairie chicken are in Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota. There's about 200 birds in Minnesota. There's about 150 birds in Wisconsin. There's 100 birds in Iowa. This population here in Missouri has pretty much wiped out, so this isn't a current map. There's about 100 birds here at the Missouri-Iowa border. So you can see that their range, greater prairie chickens range is restricted, but there's still about, an estimate of about 300 to 400,000 greater prairie chickens left. Now, lesser prairie chickens, their range in the red areas have recently been listed as a threatened species in Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, and parts of Texas, and as an endangered species here in New Mexico and Texas. So these two populations, all of them together, there's about 30 to 40,000 lesser prairie chickens left in the world. And again, why Kansas is so special for me is that we have both of these species. Their ranges overlap in a very small hybrid zone in Western Kansas. And these habitats vary a lot. So if we look at the greater prairie chicken range, they are found where tall grass prairie occurs. So mostly tall grass that cannot be found in mixed grass. And These tall grass prairies, they're thick, they're tall, they have, you know, historically bison would graze them, as compared to the short grass prairies where the lesser prairie chickens live. This is a study. These are both my study sites, so eastern and western Kansas. And you can see that the lesser prairie chicken inhabits short grass prairie, lots of yuccas, prickly pear cactus, so a much different habitat, but their ranges do overlap in that mixed grass prairie region. Now, where their ranges overlap, they do form mixed species leks. The lek is just an area where they display. And so here's a greater prairie chicken facing off with a lesser prairie chicken. And if you look at them, you can see that one is slightly bigger than the other. The greater is on the right and the lesser is on the left. They are different in size. So greaters weigh about 1,000 grams, lessers weigh about 800 grams. So lessers are about 80% the size of a greater. You can also see that their plumage is different. And I've done spectral analysis on the feathers, and the browns are darker and the whites are whiter on the greater prairie chicken. Whereas on the lesser prairie chicken, the browns are lighter and the whites are creamier. But the biggest difference is their vocalizations, and I'll talk about that later. And I'll talk about why I have taxidermy mounts on wheels a little bit later, but this is the best picture I have of a greater female next to a lesser female. And you can see that those same patterns of the more distinct barring, the more darker barring on the greater versus the lesser continue with the females. There's one more quality that you can't really see. If you can see the bottom of their belly, greaters have barring all the way from their breast all the way to their undertow coverts, whereas lesser prairie chickens, the barring kind of fades and their bellies are cream and without much barring. So I mentioned leks a couple times. They have a unique mating system called a lek mating system. You know, most species of birds are socially monogamous, right? You have one male, one female, they defend a territory. Prairie chickens have a lek mating species. So males will gather in a small area compared to the entire landscape that's available. Males will gather and defend territories, and these are two males walking the line of their territory there. These territories are very close in space. You'll see grid stakes in a lot of my pictures because we use these to map out the territories of the males. And these grid stakes are about 20 feet apart, or about 6 meters. And then females will visit these lek sites, and then they'll choose a male to mate with, and then she'll go off and raise the young completely on her own. So the male and female are together for about, you know, a couple seconds, and that's the extent of their bonding, if you will. It is a promiscuous system, so females can mate with multiple males. Most of the time they don't. They pick the sexiest male, and that's the only male they mate with. And then, you know, and the males obviously mate with multiple females. So it's a promiscuous system with multiple mating in both males and females, and virtually no pair bond. And, you know, the title of the talk about what makes males sexy. Well, some males are really sexy. If we look at how copulations are distributed throughout the lek, you know, copulations of when they mate, we see that about 10% of the males get 75% of all the copulations out of 194 copulations that I observed. And this is what it looks like. This is kind of a typical graph. This is just one lek in 1 year. And you can see that only half of the males present were able to get a mate at all, whereas, you know, 2 of them got over half of the matings. So males' mating success is really skewed, and it seems that females agree on which males are really sexy. And so this is how I started my PhD, you know, making this observation that females seem to agree that particular males are really sexy. And I wanted to know what makes that male so sexy. And I guess I should stop and pause for a moment. If you have a question, please put it in the chat box. I'll answer it at the end of the talk. So, being a PhD student, started thinking, okay, well, what makes males sexy? Well, it could be their morphology or what they look like. Could they be their behavior or what they're doing? Their territory, maybe there's something about where they are on the lek. Traditionally, we think that birds closer to the center of the lek are sexier than those on the edge. And then, of course, when we talk about males, we have to think about testosterone. And so I picked a beautiful study location. Kansas has a bad rap of being flat. I picked the hilly part, and we find that prairie chickens, where they still occur in Kansas, it's the hilly parts that are unable to be plowed. And so I get to spend my time in the beautiful parts of Kansas. So this is the Flint Hills in eastern Kansas. This is in late spring. This area was burned, and so all the dead brown vegetation is gone, and all you see is the beautiful green regrowth. I should mention that that little box at the top, that's not a building, that's a blind. It's about 4 feet high. And so the leks are typically located at the tops of hills where they're very conspicuous for the females to find them. And it's also very easy for them to see predators coming. And we sit in that blind and we watch the birds. And we have to get out there very early in the morning. Kansas has some of the most beautiful dark skies, and we get out there an hour before sunrise to get in the blind, and the sky is simply amazing. So we get in the blind and we wait for them to show up. This is a view from western Kansas. You can see it's a lot drier out there. We needed to know individual males. How do I know that one male got all the females? Well, I have to catch them and mark them first. And so how we catch prairie chickens is we put up traps, and one type of trap is a walk-in trap. And so basically, let's say the lek is on the left-hand side. The birds generally don't fly exactly to their position on the lek. They walk to it. And so a bird will show up and it'll try to walk to its spot, and it'll get caught in this chicken wire. And then it'll just keep following the fence because they're big birds and they don't want to fly if they don't have to. They just follow this chicken wire. And then there's a little funnel here and they get caught in the trap. And so again, they just kind of follow the fence line and then get caught in the trap. And so we are watching this all happen from inside the blind. And once we get a bird in the trap, we run out and get it out using a fishing net. We get it out of the fishing net and then we process it. The other way we catch birds is using a drop net. And this was like my tallest and shortest field assistant ever. But this drop net is suspended about 4 feet above the ground. It's held up by tension. And once a bird is underneath it, I can release the clip and it falls on top. Now I have a video in the next slide, and it's a little distracting because there's some barn swallows coming in and they land on this rope. But if you focus on this blob here, that is a prairie chicken. And I know that sometimes my videos don't transmit well over the internet. And so I'm going to put in the chat box, there it is. This is not working, of course. Well, while that played, or no, I can't do that. Anyway, if you go on YouTube and you search for Audubon of Kansas, we have a prairie chicken playlist, and it has these videos. So if this video doesn't work for you right now, you can go there later and see most of my videos. I don't have all of them. But anyway, watch this drop net, ignore the barn swallows that are very distracting, and notice that I caught this bird back here. And then what follows is me frantically running out of the blind to get that bird out of the net. After we get them out, we put them into a gunny sack. This was many years ago. We put a unique combination of colored tail colors, and so that way when they display, they stick their tails up and it's very obvious what male it is. That fades within a couple weeks. So we also put colored leg bands on there and aluminum band so that we can identify them, you know, later in the season and next year without capturing them. Take a whole suite of measurements, including the comb length here, wing, whole bunch of measurements to get a lot of morphological measurements. And then we release them. And so they usually come back to the lek the next day. Sometimes they come back the same day if there's females present. And we watch them to try and figure out what they're doing. So we see lots of behaviors. And so the first behavior is a boom display. This is a greater prairie chicken. And he's going to do the boom display. It starts out with their feet stomping the ground really fast, and on a calm morning you can hear this really well. Then they lean over, their wings are stretched, their tails are up, they inflate their air sac and emit a low booming vocalization. And again, the boom might not come through, but it's something like boom, boom. So it's a low kind of about 2 seconds long, and you can hear this really well. This is a lesser prairie chicken, and I always say from a distance, you can tell the difference between a greater prairie chicken and a lesser prairie chicken by looking at how long the air sac inflates. So you saw that greater prairie chicken, that long boom, boom, it inflated for a long time. Lesser prairie chickens just go pop, pop. And so their air sac inflates for a very short period of time. So this is a lesser prairie chicken displaying. Stomping his feet, pop, pop. And they do flick their tail when they vocalize. Here he goes again, pop, pop. And there's a female. And I got distracted by the female. Okay, so again, greater prairie chicken, big orange air sac, lesser, this is a nice one because it shows a greater prairie chicken in front with the air sac not quite inflated, lesser prairie chicken than black in the back. They do have different color air sacs. Greater prairie chicken is more orange, lesser prairie chicken is more red. And here's a lesser prairie chicken doing a behavior you don't see very often. It's called the prenuptial bow, which is a very crazy fancy name for it, but it's basically they just squat on the ground with their wings spread. I know it makes me think a little bit like a sharp-tailed grouse, which is also in the same genus as the two prairie chickens. But they do this infrequently, but common enough that it has a name. This next video is going to show a flutter jump. And so if you watch this male in the front, he's going to jump into the air and fly a short distance, you know, maybe 20 feet or 6 meters. And usually the males that do the flutter jump, they are not close to the female. This blob back here is the female. And they're just trying to get the female's attention. Two booms, and here's the flutter jump. Ah, a very short one. And here's kind of mid flutter jump. They do emit a cackling type vocalization when they fly. And I think this, I forget what, oops. This video not playing, there it goes. Oh, this is showing a face off. So you can see these two males back here. They're at their territory boundary and they're fighting. Most of the time, they'll just look at each other, but when the females are present, especially, they'll get into physical combat with each other. And at a distance, you usually see and detect leks. So when I hear a new lek, I usually scan the horizon to try and figure out, where it is. And you can see these males jumping up during their fights. And here is male jumping up, facing off with each other. And this series of pictures is from Judd Patterson. He's a local photographer here in Kansas, and it's showing that this is physical combat. They often grab with their beaks and they don't let go. So he's still hanging on. His physical combat. And then every once in a while, you see something interesting on the lek. Obviously, this is not a typical behavior, but this is just kind of a funny story. It was kind of late in the season, and it was a really foggy morning. In fact, I had a hard time finding the blind to get into it this morning. And this deer came to the lek, and he started fighting with the prairie chickens. And I thought, well, nobody is going to believe me that this deer, is fighting with the prairie chickens. And so I had a hard time getting a video because it was so dark. But I finally did. And it was just so funny. And I think the prairie chicken's reaction is funny too. He's just like, I'm going to stand my ground. I'm going to display here to show you that this is my territory. And the deer is not impressed. Okay, so I recorded the time spent displaying aggressive behaviors. We also, like I said, recorded the position of males relative to grid stakes. And from this, I got a whole bunch of positions, and then we could make these blobs, if you will, and measure territory size. So that's the area of this blob, and then distance from the center of the territory to the center of the lek. And for the center of the lek, I just pooled all the males' positions together to come up with the lek center. And then to measure testosterone, immediately after we remove the birds from either the walk-in trap or the drop net, we measured testosterone using a blood sample and enzyme immunoassay kits. And so this is the whole suite of things that I thought might relate to sexiness. And since then, I've also looked at color, which isn't as important. And I have a graduate student that's still working on her dissertation, and she is looking at the foot stomping behavior and how that relates. But for me, these are the characters I looked at for my PhD. And how do we know which males are sexy? Well, we look for copulations on the lek. And so I'm going to show you a video of a copulation. I want you to watch the female following the copulation because she's going to shake really vigorously, and that indicates a successful copulation. Okay, so there's the female. Zoom in on her. And she's crouching, spreading her wings, indicating she's receptive, but then she's kind of coy and jumps away. She's getting ready. Okay, she's crouching, her wings are spread. Oh, male gets interrupted. She's like, I'm not sure. Okay, well, it takes a while, but you can usually tell it's going to happen because so here she's crouching, steps on. Male gets beat up, but the female shakes her wings vigorously. So that indicates a successful copulation. And again, here's some stills. This picture actually shows the female in the background with her pinnae partially up, which is kind of interesting. Male always grabs the back of the neck. Okay, so again, these are all the things I looked at, and these are the ones that were important. So males that were larger in size, tarsus is the leg, so that's a measure of structural size. It's kind of like measuring the height of a person. So males with larger tarsus attracted more females. males with larger comb above their eye, males with high level of testosterone, and males close to the center of the leg. And I am a scientist, I have to show you a couple graphs. And so this is what the data looks like. If it is on this zero line or overlaps this zero line, that means it's not important. And if it's above, that means a positive correlation. So you can see that testosterone was the strongest predictor of female or male mating success, of attracting a female. And so testosterone is the best predictor, and then comb and tarsus were kind of intermediate, and distance to the center, and distance is negative. So a shorter distance means more females that it attracted. And so then, I did that for my PhD. And after that, as a professor, I thought, well, females can be sexy too. What makes a female sexy? And again, remember, I'm working now in Western Kansas, where we see both greater and lesser prairie chickens. And so when I sat and racked my brain about what males might be looking for in a female, knowing that they have a promiscuous system, knowing that male mating success isn't limited in many ways, I only came up with one trait that could make females sexy. And that is that they are the same species as the male. That seemed pretty critical. And so that's when I went about testing. And I did that with robots. Typically, when we are looking at how, birds' behavior might change with the presence of another individual, typically we put out a static taxidermy mount. But I'm working with a declining species and a lek mating species. If I put out a static taxidermy mount, all the birds on the lek would see it, but it wouldn't be on all the birds' territories, so it'd only be on one male's territory. And so you have this conflict where, they've seen it before, are they going to respond to it when it's on their territory as a way of, the same way that they would have, being that they seen it before. So all these things, made me think, what, and plus, if I put out a static taxidermy mount, if I wanted to change it, I would have to flush the entire lek and then change it out, get back in my blind, watch the behavior, go out, flush the entire, and I didn't want to cause all that disturbance to a lek mating species. And yeah, I wanted to present two robots, a greater and a lesser, and preferably in the same morning. So we got the male is, there's not a lot of other covariates that could affect his behavior. I also chose it because I love doing, well, it's not taxidermy, it's making museum study skins. And my husband does radio controlled airplanes. And so I thought this would be a great way to use both of our talents to advance science. So we made this robot, and I'm sorry for some gruesome pictures, but here's the chassis. We had it 3D printed from our engineering department. Just got a regular fiberglass body or regular styrofoam body, covered it in fiberglass. And then we chipped out the foam on the inside so we could put the battery there. We put a servo in the head so the head could move left and right, so it would look more realistic. And so then we had two graders and two lessers, so that we could tell if it was the individual that I made or they're reacting to the species. So this is a video. On the left-hand side is the female getting stuck in the grass. On the right-hand side is a male, and he's not impressed. He's flying away. I thought the hardest part about this project was going to be creating these robots, but I found out the hardest part of the project was manipulating the prairie chicken robot in such a way that it did not scare the males. I finally ended up doing this where I went to Lowe's and got exterior carpeting, and I put out carpet rolls covering up the grass and just made this runway. I tried to do a big circle where the bird would circle the whole lek and then come back, but I found that when it was on the far side of the circle, it had a hard on the track. So I found that if I just run a straight line, I can go through 2, 3, 4 males' territories in one morning, and thereby reduce the number of times that I show the robot to the birds. And you can see, I finally figured it out. I'm going to show the video, the female displaying here. We have a greater prairie chicken in the front and a lesser prairie chicken in the back. If you look at the female's head, it does move at some point, but you can see both of these birds are very interested in the robot and are acting as if it was a real female. And you can see the prairie chicken doesn't care about the carpet. He just, that's another surface to display on. But some birds got really excited by the presence of a female. This is a lesser prairie chicken trying to mate with my robot. Failure. When this happened, I would flush the lek, I would right the robot and continue my observation as soon as they returned. And this is what I found. And again, I'm sorry, it's another graph. But you should look over here. So display, we've seen no difference in display. So whether it was their own species or the other species, display did not change. But we see a trend in aggression. So greater prairie chickens had increased aggression when a greater prairie chicken female was present. And lesser prairie chickens also had greater aggression when a greater female prairie chicken was present. So both greater and lesser males were more aggressive when a greater female was present. Now, this does not follow my hypothesis, right? It should have been with their own species. And so this suggests, this could possibly be a source of where we do see there are hybrids in this population. It's only 1 to 3%, so they're not really a threat to their species status, but we do see mistakes happen. And this could be the mistake that's happening if a lesser prairie chicken is attracted to, if a lesser prairie chicken male mates with a greater prairie chicken female, because maybe they are selecting for females that are larger in size. And that would make sense that males would select for females that are larger in size because presumably they would produce more eggs. So in conclusion, male prairie chickens adjust their aggressive behavior with the presence of greater prairie chicken females. And so the good thing is that they could tell the difference between the robots, and they do seem to be responding to the species of the robot, just not in the way that I thought they would. So now I'm going to finish up, not too much longer, but I'll finish up with kind of really the call to action. And the thing that really made me leave a tenured position at a major university to come out to Kansas and fight for these birds. Prairie chickens are experiencing severe declines. That's why lesser prairie chickens have recently been listed, and greater prairie chickens in Kansas have declined 30% in the last 6 years. There is a real problem happening. The one thing that I'm hopeful about is that we know the solution. This is what the prairie chickens need. This is beautiful, tall, thick grass for nesting. There's a lot of grass in Kansas. The Flint Hills are not plowed. There's lots of areas in western Kansas that are not plowed. There's grass present. Most of it is very short, either due to overgrazing or burning annually, or other various means, but we know they need grass, and we know they need at least some tall grass for nesting. And so this is nesting habitat that we see in western Kansas. And here's a prairie chicken nest. Isn't it beautiful? Can't you see it? Right there in the middle of the screen, the dark spot. Well, this is me back when we had like regular cameras, and I was literally like 2 feet away from this nest. And I knew where it was because I had found the nest previously. This was during my PhD, so we were going and monitoring nest and nesting success. And as I was approaching, I had my camera and I had pushed it down halfway to focus. And then all of a sudden she flew up and, whoops, wrong way. She flew up and this is the picture I got. I was just scared and I pressed the shutter and I got her beautiful barred tail and her nest underneath. The happy news, besides us knowing that they need grass, the happy news is that they have the potential to produce a lot of offspring in a year. They typically lay 8 to 12 eggs. Those eggs hatch within 23 days. Hopefully, if they have thick grass to protect them from predators. And those chicks, if it's a normal year with average precipitation, they can grow. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. Only 17% of nests survived until hatching. This was in the eastern population in the Flint Hills, but 11% of females were killed during the incubation period, and only 42% of females survived to the following year. To compare this, 55% of males survived to the following year. So females are getting eaten while they're on nests. And again, this is related to cover. If they don't have protection for the nest, they don't have protection for themselves, and they have trouble surviving. And so, yeah, and this, just hearing these declines made me leave my tenured job to join Audubon of Kansas. And we're trying to help prairie chickens and other grassland species through 3 means. The first is advocacy, or advancing environmentally friendly legislation. We support wetland conservation like these whooping cranes. There's 2 wetlands of international importance in Kansas, Cheyenne Bottoms and Quivira National Wildlife Refuge. The whooping cranes migrate through and they're a beautiful sight to see. We encourage proper wind energy siting. We don't want those turbines to be put on the last tall grass and short grass prairies where the prairie chickens still have a stronghold. We want them to be put on developed land. And we support initiatives to conserve declining species like the lesser prairie chicken and greater prairie chicken. Conservation, we demonstrate our conservation practices through our sanctuary program. We have 3 sanctuaries at the current time and a couple more on their way. Our largest sanctuary is 5,000 acres, the Hutton Niobrara Ranch Wildlife Sanctuary. It's actually not in Kansas, it's in Nebraska. It's along the banks of the Niobrara River in northern Nebraska, but it's a beautiful property that has sharp-tailed grouse, greater prairie chicken, elk, mountain lion, porcupine. It's a great property. And it's also a working cattle ranch. Ectoberg Wildlife Friendly Demonstration Farm shows how farming and riparian corridors and buffer strips can support wildlife. And then Mount Mitchell Heritage Prairie is a public park that also supports wildlife. So we show through our sanctuary program how people and wildlife, how agriculture and wildlife can coexist. And then finally, we believe strongly that people will not protect what they don't know. So we have 2 festivals, our celebration of cranes in fall to see coinciding with whooping crane migration through the state. We just started a prairie chicken festival last year to bring attention to this wonderful species. Do various public outreach events, and actually one we're just starting now is we're trying to get binoculars into every library in Kansas so that we can inspire the next generation to look for birds. Like I said, hopefully by now you want to come and see the prairie chickens. It really is something that's amazing to be out there in the prairie, get into the blind, hear the coyotes howl, and see these birds appear out of the dark murkiness of dawn and do their thing right in front of you. And I every time I was out there doing research, I was like, man, I really wish I could get people out here to see what I see, that they would protect these amazing creatures. So starting the Kansas Lek Treks to bring people out to Western Kansas. We have tours to see both greater and lesser prairie chickens. We also have field trips to those 2 wetlands of international importance, Cheyenne Bottoms and Quivira. Smoky Valley Ranch is a wonderful nature conservancy property that has like a glimmer of hope in it's the one place I know in the world where lesser prairie chickens are increasing in population. We also have wonderful geology. Kansas is a wonderful place if you're a fossil hunter. We have wine tasting, we have a trivia contest. It's lots of fun. So I encourage you to come. It's April 13th through the 16th, 2023. And we started this to increase awareness of prairie chickens, but also to fight a lot of the negative press. And this is what we're fighting against. And this week, I cannot believe that this week, the Kansas Senate adopted a resolution condemning the protection of the lesser prairie chicken. It just blows my mind that conservation used to be a bipartisan effort. And in Kansas, it's not. And I want to change that. And so this is what we're fighting. We need your help. Sign up for our newsletter so you keep up to date on what's happening. Donate to Audubon of Kansas. You're supporting us in our efforts to speak and be the voice of wildlife and legislation. And please come to our Prairie Chicken Festival. It's a great time. The prairie chickens are well worth it. Again, it's in Hayes. It's always mid-April. I hope you can make it. I'd like to thank all the people that helped me out through the years, the photographers, I had a PhD advisor, Brett Sandercock, who made this crazy path of mine possible. And just thank you so much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Jackie. That was a really interesting presentation. And then we have a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll go through first. And then anybody else who would like to ask a question can unmute. First off, regarding the blood samples that you were taking, how do you do those?
It's very easy. We actually just clip the toenail until they bleed. And so then we get our little tube full of blood, and then we use a silver nitrate blood stop stick to stop the bleeding. And it happens, it's funny, if you pinch their toe in a certain way, you pinch off the blood, you rub the silver nitrate on it, you let go, and it most of the time it's that easy to stop them from bleeding.
Great. Two people have asked, what are the main predators for prairie chickens?
So the males on the lek are mostly avian predators. So there's one day I was just walking through the prairie in a recently burned area, and there's this pile of feathers, and right in the middle was one great horned owl feather. And so avian predators, including great horned owls, red-tailed hawks, because they're in short grass out in the open, they're pretty conspicuous. For the females, mostly mammalian predators. We didn't have cameras on to know for sure which mammals, but in the area there's coyotes, raccoons, skunks, and we can tell they're mammalian predators because the feathers are more centrally located and they have more teeth marks on them. There was one female, really sad, that had died, and she had saliva from her head all the way to her shoulders. Presumably a snake got her and tried ingesting her, but then realized that he couldn't get his mouth over her shoulders and then spit her back out. And of course, nest predators, there's lots of snakes and raccoons and skunks and badgers, and all those things are nest predators.
It sounds like they've got an uphill battle.
Yes, yeah. But we have shown, and lots of studies have shown, that the predators are not limiting the population size. It really is habitat. Habitat is the strongest predictor of the number of prairie chickens in an area. And so that's what we really need to focus on.
What are the lekking periods for each of the prairie chickens?
They're both pretty much the same in Kansas. It's mid-March through mid-April, with a peak around April 13th.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask? Just unmute yourself and ask away. Lots of thank yous in the chat as well. People that have really enjoyed the talk. It's great, as I say, to be able to have guests from elsewhere here for this sort of thing. Last chance. Any other questions? Oh, one person wants to know, what was the justification for the senators to oppose the conservation effort?
They think that protecting the lesser prairie chicken is going to put undue restrictions on farming and grazing, and it's going to prevent oil and wind and solar energy development, which that's what we need to save the species, is to keep we need to keep the oil, wind, and solar energy out of that area. And the big transmission lines, lesser prairie chickens will not cross a high power transmission line. They won't. Greater prairie chickens, it's a little bit more permeable, but it's still a barrier. Lesser prairie chickens don't even like crossing roads. I mean, they're really species that love the open prairie. And again, that's why I love them, because when I'm out there, I feel like I'm in the real prairie, the wild prairie that's left in the state.
Well, that brings us nicely, segues into another question, which is, where do they go in the wintertime when they are?
They're not migratory, so they stick around in the winter. If there's a snow, they burrow under the snow to stay warm, but they don't go anywhere, and they're still in the grass. And yeah, the only time you really see them is between mid-March and mid-May, because that's when they're out in the open displaying. Otherwise, they know that they're food for everything on the prairie, and so they stay tucked away in the grass. If you're lucky, you can flush one up, but those females sit so tight on the nest. One day I was out with some field techs, and we were trying to walk up a nest that we knew about. And on our way to that nest, one of my field techs actually stepped on a prairie chicken nest, only broke one egg, but felt the female fly away. She felt the female brush her leg as it flew away. And so they sit so tight in that tall grass, and they hope that camouflage is going to be their major way that they stay away from predators.
One of our guests tonight has seen some leks in Wisconsin on cultivated fields. I'm wondering, where do the birds nest in that case? Are they just in the nearby brushy areas?
Well, not brush. Thick, tall grass is what they need. The brush and the trees attract predators. And so, yes, they will lek in cornfields and wheat fields. They seem to really like wheat fields, even though they don't blend in at all. But they, so they need that short area for display, but they need that thick grass. And so that's why prairie chickens are often considered an umbrella species. Because they need short grass for display, thick grass for nesting, and they need an intermediate grass for brood rearing. So it has to be thick enough so that the little chicks can hide if there's a predator, but it has to be thin enough so that they can walk through the habitat and find food. So they need different varieties of prairie, and so they're an umbrella species protecting, short grass. They're protecting the horned larks and the savanna sparrows. The tall grass, they're protecting the Henslow sparrows, and then the mixed grass would be kind of everything else, the dickcissels and grasshopper sparrows.
Right. Okay, now we're getting into it, Jackie. How different is the behavior of Atwater's prairie chicken compared to the greater and lesser?
Atwater's is technically a subspecies of greater, and so there's not a lot of behavioral difference there. The vocalization is very similar to the greater. I mean, a well-trained ear can hear slight differences. And if you have I've seen greater and Atwater's taxidermy mounts right next, or not taxidermy, or museum specimens right next to each other. There's also some slight variation in plumage. The Atwaters have almost 3 different colors on them. They're much more mottled and much more colorful, if you will, especially on their back. Greater prairie chickens tend to have a lot of black on their back. So there's differences in plumage, there's slight differences in vocalization, and obviously differences in, they like the prairie habitat along the coast. That was in the coast of Texas, so kind of a salt marsh almost habitat. And so there's differences there.
Okay, well, thank you all for your excellent questions, and thank you for your great answers too, Jackie, and for staying up a little late tonight to do this talk for us. We really do appreciate it. Lots of thank yous and good presentations in the chat room there. People really enjoyed it, and we really, really do appreciate you having come and joined us.
Great,
And
thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
I saw some people making notes, so you just never know. You might see some people at the Lex sooner than you think.
Yeah, we have a lot of, we have a few spots in the blind still available, which I think is the only way to see prairie chickens. But if you don't get in this year, make sure you sign up for our email list, and so that you can register first thing when the registration opens next year to get your spot in the blind.
Great.
So thank you, everybody. I hope to see you at a Lectrex festival some point in the future.
Thank you so much. Well, and thanks to all of you for coming tonight, and we will see you next month.